Hi, I'm Juan Nava, and I want to cover how to start off with Vehicle Spy. So if you're new to Vehicle Spy, I want to cover how do you set it up from scratch to be able to use databases in order to be able to see LIN, CAN, and Ethernet data. I'm also going to cover how to do a little bit of data logging on top of that. I'm going to cover it briefly, but it'll hopefully get you up and running. As far as the agenda, what I'm going to cover is how to set up a platform. Platform is really a file that references the databases that we're going to use. It could be a database or it can be databases on top of that. So we're going to set up a whole setup from scratch. And then I'm going to cover a little bit VSpy basics, so how to interact with Vehicle Spy, which will cover how to see the data. We'll cover how to log data, and then we'll cover how to do the standalone login on top of that. Now, kind of what hardware do you use for this will be very dependent on what protocols you need to kind of work with. So in this case, for my specific setup today, I'm going to be using a Gigastar. And the reason I'm going to use that is because it allows me to do CAN, LIN, and 100 base T1. Now, the Gigastar can be used for 1,000 base T1 as well, but I'm specifically going to be using 100 base T1. The other devices you can use would be like a Red 2, Fire 2, or Fire 2, Fire 3 value logs. These would allow you to do CAN and LIN. They do have ability to do like do IP, so 100 base TX. Those are not automotive Ethernet, so for that you would need a Gigastar or a Rad Galaxy, which would also do 100 base T1. The Rad Galaxy will only do 100 base T1. And then other things that you'll need would be like cabling, for example. So any device that we have that supports a micro SD card or an SD card can be used as a standalone logger. For what I'm going to show you at first, it really doesn't matter the tool. As long as it has the right protocol for what you're looking to do, you should be able to use it. So what kind of licensing do you need will be very dependent on what you need to do. So if you're going to do any kind of logging, you really need to be using Vehicle Spy Pro minimum. If you're just working with CAN and LIN, Vehicle Spy Professional will be sufficient. If you are working with Ethernet, Vehicle Spy Pro will work for you. You just won't be able to decode the data. So for that, if you need to decode the data, you will need to move up to Vehicle Spy Enterprise. So the system that I would be using to help you do this would be this system right here. So I have ECU-A that happens to support CAN and LIN. So my orange line here is LIN. The ECU-A happens to be the commander or the master, and then the ECU-E and ECU-F happen to be the slave or the responders. Master slave is sort of the old naming convention. Commander responder is sort of the new name. So you might hear me kind of interchanging that here. But in this case, because we're doing just monitoring, it really doesn't matter which one is which, because we're just going to connect to the line itself, and then we should be able to see that data. Here we have also a CAN wire denoted by this black and bluish or purple twisted pair. In this case, it happened to be daisy chain from between ECUD and ECUC. So basically, wherever we connect within this line, we should be able to see all the communication between all these ECUs. And then between ECUB and ECUC, we have 100 base T1. So here, I'm wiring up my Gigastar. So if you work with CAN and LIN before, you should be able to, hopefully you know how to connect that. So basically, those are just kind of connecting to the wires. Ideally, depending on what situation you're in, you might need to use a breakout box in order to be able to do this. In some cases, in the past when I've had limited tools, I will actually use paper clips, or I've used paper clips to connect to the LIN and CAN wires, and then use some kind of form to connect to the actual wires themselves. So that one's actually pretty straightforward. We can do that. One thing I'm not showing here is that we do have to have a common ground between our tool and the rest of the system. So that is kind of important. So for some example, if you're doing if you're powering the Gigastar with an external power supply, for example, we would need to ground that power supply to the vehicle or to the system. Otherwise, you will not be able to see that communication. It will look kind of unusual, it won't look correct, and it'll look like the tools are not working. And it's just because that ground needs to be common across the system. So the vehicle or the bench, and then the tool. Now, with the when it comes to the Ethernet, we do have to do what's called a active tap. So we do have to have a device that's in line with the system. So in other words, we do have to break these connections somehow in order to get them to go through the device. Because Ethernet, in this case, it is full duplex. That means that the system, or at least like module E or ECUB and ECUC, can communicate simultaneously. And what that means to you is that because they can communicate simultaneously on the same wire, you can't really tell the difference between communications from ECUB and ECUC. So because of that, you have to do this thing called an active tap. So in this case, ideally you want to break the connection somehow. I would never recommend that you cut the wires literally. What I would recommend maybe using a breakout box or something, and hopefully use the vehicle connectors that are, hopefully you can find them. In my case here, I have a harness that I made using some maintenance connectors or cables, and then I add my own connector to be able to connect to the system here. Fairly straightforward, at least in my system. In vehicles, this can be kind of complex because sometimes these connectors can be kind of hard to get a hold of. And so you'll need to work with suppliers or to get a hold of some of these connectors, or sometimes you got to go to different websites to be able to get them. And some of these connectors are not exactly cheap. But once you got this wired up, this will make life super, super easy. So the next part we're going to do is how do we configure the hardware to begin with? So to begin, we'll want to open up Vehicle Spy now, and I'm going to click my Vehicle Spy shortcuts. I can open it up. Now I do have my device already powered on, so I'm using a USB to connect to it, and I am also using the device is already powered up. I do have a power supply to power this up. So to begin with, I'll click on this button that says configure hardware. There are other places we can do this from. There's a little circuit board here. That little green icon there, or this little picture, it is a circuit board. So I'm going to click on that to open up Neovia Explorer. So once this window opens up, I'm going to click on my device, click on connect, and then I can go ahead and configure my device. Now, this window will greatly vary depending on what hardware you're working with, but the way you configure it is really the same across all our devices. So once you kind of understand how to do one, you kind of understand how to do all of them. The only difference you'll see, it will be like the channel count. So in this case, my Gigastar only supports 6 CAN channels, but we do have other devices like the Fire 3 that can do 16 CAN channels, and Red 2 that can do 8 CAN channels. So it really depends on what you're using. If you're using a Valley CAN, for example, some will support between 1, 2, and 4 CAN channels. So this will just be a reduced list of this. So here to begin to configure, the first thing I want to do is click on the channels that I want to use. So in this specific case, I'm only going to be using the stability channel 1, and I'm going to be using 500K for the regular CAN, and then for the CAN FD portion, I will be using 2 megabits. Now, if your system only supports CAN, you don't need to do anything with the CAN FD. You can leave it alone. It will not cause any issues. The only time it would cause issues if you're trying to send data or simulate some messages onto a regular CAN bus that doesn't support CAN FD, because it just doesn't know what to do with the extra bits. So in that case, it would cause a problem. But if you're just monitoring CAN, this is sufficient. We can just use this to kind of just look at our baud rate. The next thing I want to do is configure my link channel. The Gigastar only supports one link channel. And in this case, the baud rate that I'm going to be using is 10,417. In this case, there's nothing else I need to turn on because I'm only going to be monitoring the system, not simulating. If I was going to simulate, I may have to turn on this master resistor on. It's been my experience. You normally don't need to do that for simulation. But definitely, if you're just going to monitor, you shouldn't need to do anything else. And then the one that's the hardest one to really kind of begin with, at least at first, is your Ethernet. But in order to monitor Ethernet, you do have to do what's called an active tap. And that would be this automotive Ethernet tap. That would be this option here. So when you set in what kind of tap to do, whether it's a normal active tap or a cut-through active tap, you need to understand how this works. So a normal active tap does a store and forward. This is where the entire frame must ingress on one port before it starts to egress on the other. This is normal operation for many Ethernet devices, such as switches. This allows them to check for errors before forwarding to the destination. When you enable cut-through mode, this will allow the frame to start egressing almost as immediately as it starts ingressing. Very low latency. This is usually in the order of tens of nanoseconds. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to select cut-through for my test. And then here in AE01, which is my automotive Ethernet channel 1, I'm going to set up my link speed. Now I could use auto. It's been my experience that if I select the baud rate from the beginning, it seems to work better. I seem to have less issues. That doesn't mean the auto doesn't work. I just, I want to reduce the time I spend looking through some of these settings. So here, since I know it's a 100 base T T1, I'm just going to set this automatically to 100. And then the other channel also, AEO2, I'm going to do the same thing, 100. Now for the link mode, we do have a couple options. I'm just going to leave it to auto. I haven't had any problems with the autos, so I'm going to just kind of stick to that. I'm not going to be using SFPs in this case. SFPs are basically these pluggable, small form pluggables. The decode starters do come with some of them. You can expand it to do other things like another, if I wanted to do another tap, I could replace the SFPs with ones that do either 100 or 1,000 base T1 also. In this case, I have nothing to do with them. So here's this is all I need to do. If I was going to do some simulation with a direct module with no tap, I would probably select independent so I can communicate directly with all these channels independently. But again, I'm doing an active tap. So I'm going to use these options. Again, I don't necessarily, in my case, I don't need to do cut through. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So I would try probably without the cut through and then try with the cut through as you see better performance, and then we'll go with that. Once you're done configuring the tool, go ahead and click on this button that says Write Settings, and that will save all the changes. If I don't click Write Settings, it will not save any of the changes that I just made. In some cases, if you're doing any kind of simulation for CAN, sometimes you might need to do turn on termination, and you can do that here with these terminations here. So once I'm done with my settings, I can simply disconnect, or I can just simply close the window. It's already saved the changes to the actual hardware. Now, since my system is actually wired in now, it's basically this is already wired in. I should be able to go online with my hardware now and be able to see raw data. So here for me, I'm actually using Vehicle Spy Enterprise because I do want to decode the Ethernet data. So I do need Enterprise at least, or I need Enterprise. And from here, all I'm going to do is I'm going to do this drop-down menu, and I'm going to click Run with Transmit. I could also do Run with Monitor because I am not simulating. And then here, I'm going to erase the buffer to clear out any bus errors. And then at the bottom here, we can see there's a LIN error. And I'm going to double click and make sure that it goes away. And I'm not seeing any more errors. So from this perspective, at least, things seem to be running really well. I can see LIN data. We can see some messages. We can see some CAN data. And then we can see some Ethernet here. So we see some Ethernet on we see Ethernet on AEO1 and AEO2. Now, from a wiring perspective, here I have that it goes into specific channels. The reality here doesn't really matter. They could be swapped the other way, and it should work just perfectly fine. But it should not matter. So here now you can see the data is incoming. So this is the raw data. Usually when you install Vehicle Spy for the first time, the window will look like this. So I could click on something like this, like the Ethernet here, and then on the bottom window or the bottom pane, I'll see the raw data, and I can see some things are changing. I can also see like the length of the message here. I can see it's 64 bytes. I can see that the destination is broadcast because it's all Fs. Source, there's the MAC address. I can see the IP address here as well, and I can see the ports. Now, in case you don't know what I'm talking about, these are things that are used to kind of determine what the message ID is. So in CAN, in LIN, they have message IDs, or really CAN has arbitration ID, which is this value here. In LIN, you have a message ID. In Ethernet, technically, you don't have a message ID or an arbitration ID because it doesn't have one. But really, the collection of these values. So really, the combination of these IP addresses and the port numbers are really your message ID. So that's how you would kind of know what message is what. So if I wanted to record data, I can just record here and it would do the raw data. So I don't necessarily need a database if I wanted to just record data. So if I need to do something quick, this is simple. I can just click on save here, and then this will save the data. Now here I do have a couple of different options to select from because I am using Ethernet. The only option I can really use here is this VSB option, which is a Vehicle Spy binary format. And I can use some of the Wireshark formats as well. If I didn't have the Ethernet, then I could save off to like CSV, and I can use some other formats. But in this case, if I want to save this off, I do have to save it off as a VSB. So simply I can go ahead and click on this. And of course, I can always replay this back through Vehicle Spy. So here, if I stop Vehicle Spy, and I do this drop down, and I run simulation, I can go to Browse, and then I'm going to go into this YouTube logger folder. Oops, it's actually here. And then I can replay that trace file again as is. If I happen to have a database loaded in, it would be decoded. So I could potentially record the data if it's a kind of an emergency to kind of record now. I can always go back and review it at a future date or a future, later in the day. So here I'm going to stop this, and then I'm going to go back to File, log on to get back to my original screen. So the first part, now that I know that my hardware is actually looking at raw data, that means my hardware is configured. So that part is sort of in my opinion, the hard part. Really, the wiring is the hard part because sometimes you got to find ways to make that work. So to begin, we'll start off by adding a logon name. A logon name is really a directory in your hard drive. So here I can go and click plus, and I can give this a name to the folder. And it could be as simple as my name. So if it's a shared computer, ideally, usually when I've done this for teams, when I would do these setups for a group of testers, I would put in their name. So they have their own workspace without messing up someone else's work. When it's just my computer, usually I tend to be very descriptive. So if I'm saying I'm working on module 25, for example, I would put that as part of the folder name. Again, your naming convention will be all over the map. It's whatever you need it to be. Just put that, and then you can just click OK. So that creates a folder. Now, on the top right, we see data, this folder, or this data button. I can click data, and then we can see that it takes me to this folder. Now, in this folder, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take stuff from this folder, and I'm going to copy it over. And then basically the three databases that I'm going to be using to decode data. So now that I have this, I can go ahead and close this off. Now, I am not required to have all this data in one location. It's just I find it a lot easier that if I put everything in one data, I don't have to worry about in the future, where did I put that file? I quite often sit behind users, and they'll copy a bunch of files and put them kind of all over all over the computer, and then 5 to 6 seconds later, they don't remember where they put them. I know that I'm going to do the same thing, so I just avoid it from the very beginning. So I just put everything in one location. So now that I have my logon name, I can begin by creating a platform. And this is really what we're going to use to reference our databases. So to begin, there's a couple of ways we can do this. You see this little yellow barrel. We can get to this location to set up our platform from this location. Or if I go to setup, you see the same icon, and I can use that the same location to get to. I tend to use this bar a lot more than anything else, just because there's things that I reference a lot. So let's click on the yellow barrel button to open up this window. Now, in the top right, we see the setup platform. Depending on what you have selected, you can click on the middle. But in this case, I'm going to click on the setup button platform on the button on the top right. From here, I can go and click add, and then I'm going to name this platform the same thing as I did my folder. Now, it is not required to be the same name. There's no linking them together. This is just for me to remember what I did. So if I'm working on a specific module, if I'm using, let's say, like the body control module, I might actually put that as part of the name. Or if it's a subsystem, maybe I'll put that as part of the name. Or if it's a vehicle program, I might put whatever name that might be. And I simply click OK. Now here I'm going to click OK. If you happen to click close, that's OK. The only difference between OK and close is that if I click OK, it will automatically select my new platform, or if I click close, it will not. So let's click close. So here we see that I didn't select it. All I have to do here is go into this option, this dropdown, and select the module or the folder that I just created. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin by adding a DBC file. DBC is sort of the older formats, but it's definitely still supported. I mean, I don't think they're going away anytime soon, at least. And in this case, I'm going to use it to load in my CAN data. Other file formats that are used for CAN will also be like ARXMLs. I will show you how to load in ARXML for my Ethernet. And I'm using specifically all these different files so you know how to kind of load them in. So from this window, when we select we'll see the left pane, we'll see that we have a bunch of different channels. So here, really what it begins with is the channel first, and then you add the database to the specific channel. Which one you use will be depending on the cabling that you're using, whether it's custom cabling or some of our cabling or cables that we offer. But that will basically depend on how you're going to set this up. So in this case, I know I'm using DWCAN01, which means dual wire CAN. And then from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on add to add my database. And then from here, I'm going to click the appropriate company that I might be working with. So in this case, I'm just going to do a DBC, which is a generic format. And then from here, I can see that I see my CAN database. All I have to do now is click open, and this will begin the importing the file. So this is all I'm going to do. All I have to do now is really loading that file. We see a couple boxes that are kind of flashing a red box around them. And what it's saying is that I made a change to the platform, therefore I need to save the changes. So here all I have to do is really click the save, and then my plot or my DBC is now loaded in. And I can get a confirmation that it is in fact loaded in. So if I went to Spike Networks, Messages Editor, and then if I click on this button that says Database, and I see it's already DLECAN, I see that I loaded in a database. So that part went successful. So if I want to load in another database, I can. I would do all the different channels that I need to load in, and it's just a matter of finishing, doing all those to get that to be finished. So it depends on how many channels you're kind of doing. Now, this window, you'll see a lot more CAN channels than your hardware may support. This is meant to kind of cover all our hardware that's possible, where when we configure the hardware, that was very specific to that hardware. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize the CAN, and if I'm going to work with LIN, the next part I need to load in is an LDF, which is a LIN description file. So for here, I'm going to expand LIN, click on LIN 1, and again, it's also, again, depending on how you're wired. In this case, I happen to be using LIN 1 because the hardware that I have only supports LIN 1. What's good about these setups is that if I take this setup that has DWCAN 1, and I go to a different hardware that supports the same CAN channel, I can use the same setup to be able to view that data. So in this case here, if I take DWCAN 1, if I'm using DWCAN 1 and LIN, I could potentially use one of the value cans that support CAN and LIN. I can use a Fire 2, a Red 2, a Fire 3, and these specific channels will do the same exact thing. So here now that I selected LIN, I'm going to click on Browse, and I'm going to select my LIN LDF, and I'm going to click Open. And once again, we're going to see that the box is flashing because we made a change, or I can go and click on that box to save the change. And once again, I could get a confirmation. Now, if I go back to Messages Editor and I go into the LIN section, click on LIN 1, we'll see that we load in the database for LIN. And then now, the last part I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to Network Databases, and I'm going to load in my ARXML for the Ethernet. So one thing to keep in mind here, I'm selecting the channel first, then I load in the database. For ARXML, we'll see a couple tabs. The next one will be ARXML here, so we can kind of go between them. And I'm going to load in ARXML, which is an out-of-source standard. I'm going to click ARXML. So here, this one's a little different. We're going to select the database first, and then we go and select the channels. So I'm going to click Add. I see my ARXML, and click Open. Now, these clusters are going to be named all over the map. I've seen some that are very generically named. I see some that are very domain specific. I see some that have module names. So they're kind of all over the map. Really, whatever this database equals to, you're going to figure out what buses you're going to connect to. Now, in this case, because we're doing automotive Ethernet, we know that we're connected to two different channels. And so in that case, because I'm doing an active tap, that means I need to add this database to two different channels. In this case, I'm happen to be using AE01 and AE02. And then I'll have to just click somewhere else. I can see my database, I can see the channels, and all I have to do is simply click Close. This will import the database, and then once again, I click on the red box to finish that importing that file. So here, really, if I just need an Ethernet, I can just go straight to the one format I need, and I don't need to do the rest. So here, I can go back to my Messages Editor now, and if I do this drop down and go to Ethernet, I should be able to go to either AE01 and AE02, and I should be able to see the database loaded in for that specific database. Now, I've kind of thrown a little bit of terminology from an Ethernet perspective. The one thing I would recommend is if you go to our Intrepid page, if you go to the very bottom, or you can go straight to YouTube, it'll take you to YouTube. In YouTube, I have this webinar that I did for 10-bit T1S. The first, I believe it's the first 25, maybe 26 minutes, cover the basics of Ethernet. It's not a comprehensive everything because it's really hard to cover that in 25 minutes, but it will give you at least a basic understanding of what I'm talking about. I cover things like, what does UDP mean, TCP mean. So it's not all-encompassing, but it gives you just enough information to hopefully move forward. And if you go to our Intrepid page, we have definitely lots of videos that you can go watch and go learn some stuff. We do have another video from Cold Korea that covers Ethernet in about an hour. So here, now that I have this, so one thing about ARXMLs, at least from an Ethernet perspective, when they're being created, sometimes you'll get these extra connections that are being made. And sometimes there'll be just a few, and sometimes you'll definitely see a lot more messages normally, which is fine. Occasionally, the numbers that are in these other messages that don't really have a definition of a message or signals within that message will kind of get in the way of the actual ones that have actual payloads. So if this one comes out, Vehicle Spy might show you this one when it really meant to be maybe this one down here, for example. And it's just if you start looking at some of these numbers, so if I look like for port 6001, we'll see that two messages kind of match, and we see all these numbers that kind of match. So Vehicle Spy is going to pick one of these, and usually it's the one towards the top of the list. So if you happen to see that, and things are not being decoded properly, what you'll want to do is you'll want to copy some of the stuff over to the receive table. Now, database button here is really the database that I just loaded in. Vehicle Spy will not let you alter this database itself. However, I can copy this over to either receive or transmit. Receive and transmit are from the perspective of Vehicle Spy. So things that I put in transmit are things that I want to simulate. In this case, I am not going to simulate because I just want to monitor potentially log data. So here, what I would want to do is copy it over to receive because I want Vehicle Spy to receive this data and decode it for me. So if I have conflicts here, what I want to do is I want to go and copy this over, and I can select one at a time, and I can right click and then copy over to receive, or I can select the first one and use my shift key and select multiple messages, right click, then I can copy this over to receive. So receive will always have a higher precedence over the database because that means we want something out of this that might be different. In some cases, it might be a different name. Sometimes we want to alter some of the scalings, how it decodes data. In this case, I am not altering any of that. I just want this to win over these messages. And I'll do the same thing with AEO2 in this case. I'm going to copy the first or the last four messages, and I'm going to copy those over to receive, and those will be over in the AEO2. Okay, so now that I have all the databases loaded, I should now be able to go online with the hardware and be able to see if everything's being decoded properly. I know it was being read in properly. Now we need to know it's being decoded properly. So now I'm going to do the drop down. I'm going to select run with transmit. I'm going to go to messages. If you don't have this window open, you can always go to Spy Networks and then click on the second option, which is messages. And then here I'm going to erase this. I'm going to double click on the errors at the bottom, make sure that there's no actual errors. So here I can now go into this window and I can focus maybe on a specific protocol. Maybe I want to specifically look at CAN. So on the left side here, I can see that DWCAN bus got added to my filters. This is usually added either based on the database that you're adding, or it's being added based on the traffic that it sees. So if it sees traffic like in LIN and you don't have a database, this will still add in LIN, even if there's no database. If you add a database, even if there's no traffic, Vehicle Spy will add a filter for that specific channel. So here, if I focus on CAN, I can see my CAN data here. If I go to details, I can click on the message, and I should be able to see the raw data. Well, I can see the raw data, but I can also see the decoded data. If I go to my LIN, for example, get rid of CAN. If I click on a specific message, I should be able to see the same thing. I can see the decoded data along with that. Of course, I can also do it up here. If I do the same thing with Ethernet, I can do the same thing. The other difference with Ethernet is that Ethernet does, as part of the payload, usually you'll see like IP addresses, MAC addresses, port numbers. But generally databases, at least I'm yet to see a database that actually contains it. And I think just because the people that the folks that create these it's just extra work. So I don't think there's not a ton of value in doing so. But Vehicle Spy, if you click on those messages that are Ethernet, at the bottom of this window or this bottom pane, you will see like the length of the Ethernet. You'll see the IP addresses. You'll see the MAC addresses. So I can see that this is being broadcasted. My broadcast message will always be all us. If I'm working with a very specific protocol and I am not using the other ones, at the very bottom of this window, I can do this columns, this window that kind of gives me a pop-up or drop-down. and I can go select the specific protocol I'm working with, and Vehicle Spy will give me the appropriate columns for that specific protocol. Generally, when I'm working with Ethernet, I like to add the MAC addresses uh, because I want to see them quickly as opposed to selecting each individual message. But I can't say that I always do that. If you're working with all these protocols and you kind of want to see all of these things, well, I can always go to setup, and then I can go in through these fields and add them to my list to kind of create my own personalized one. The other thing down here that uh, in the same setup here, I can go to fonts and colors, for example, here. And another thing that it's been kind of useful now is I can go to the size of the font and I can change this, and I can simply click close. So if the size of the letters or the font is just not big enough, you can go and change it also. Okay, so you don't have to be trying to look at that small font. Here I'm actually going to put it back. Actually, I'm going to go with 10. And then the other thing here is I'm going to get rid of details here, which is this button here, because I don't want that window. Normally, I'm not a big fan of it. When I'm working with these things, especially with big frames, it can be real helpful. But normally, I am not a fan of it. I like the real estate of seeing more messages rather than less. But again, that changes on a case-by-case basis. There's days I actually do prefer it. So here, when we start Vehicle Spy, white means there's nothing in the buffer. And part of it down here, we see that straight. That means that's what's part of the buffer, or what's in the buffer, or the part that's filled in. So if I click Save, that's how much data you will receive. However, whenever you're going to start a test, whether it's to prove something failed or something passed, I'm always going to recommend you click Erase. That way, starts fresh, and then go and run your test to prove either case that you're doing. If you're going to focus on maybe just Ethernet, for example, I'm going to recommend also the same thing, that you click Erase so you focus just on the messages that you care. If you don't do that, if you do unfiltered data and then you filter it, your trace file will have a combination of those two. So if someone's looking at the data, they'll say, well, maybe your CAN data went dead, or there's a loss of comp. And so that might cause confusion, right? Unnecessary confusion. So I would recommend filter if you're going to filter to show what you're going to do, and then erase the buffer, and then go ahead and save, run your test, and then go ahead and save. Now this buffer is controlled in the same location as setup. In order to change it, I do need to stop Vehicle Spy. So I'm going to click Setup. By default, it is 50,000 messages. It's been my experience that most computers can't really handle much more than 800,000, at least laptops. Some can handle a million. Once you get into the above million, some computers will not open it. They just don't have enough memory. If you get a file that's big enough, like you do not multi-million, but millions of lines or millions of messages, there might be a point where even Vehicle Spy may not be opening. But sometimes it is also a limitation of the PC. So just kind of be careful with this one. So it's just simply add a number, or add a 0, or change the value, click close, and that increases the buffer size. So here, since I just erased, added back my messages, I would click Erase, run my test, and then I can go ahead and save that, like I showed you earlier, and then we can pick the appropriate file. Keep in mind, if you're doing Ethernet, the only options is VSB and PCAP. And just click Save. Now, if I go to my button that says Data, it will take me to where that file is stored. Now, this is very dependent on the original window where you select the file name or the login name. So if I go back to my login name, I got to stop Vehicle Spy for this. If I click on Logon, it's very dependent on what this folder says. So if it's just kind of randomly picked when you open a Vehicle Spy, it will save data where you may not be expecting. To get back to my original window, there's a tiny little X here under Data, and then that'll get me back to the screen. And that will get you to just be able to log data and monitor data. Okay, so I created a platform. That is not actually the setup. That is just the reference to the database. So if I'm happy with what I see, all I have to do now is go to File and Save As, or save the first time, won't really matter. And then here I can go ahead and give my setup a name. So this is module 25. If it's capturing maybe LIN, I can say LIN, CAN, and Ethernet, for example. Then all I have to do is save. Now here, what I did do is I saved it off as a VS3. Now this is just going to be on my PC. This is perfect. because this will be, the platform will remain separate, and my setup will remain separate on top of that. My setup really includes all these, any things that I copied over. So all these things that are received, those are personalized messages. Those will be part of my setup and not the platform. Things that are in database are part of the platform. So things that are the tabs that I have open, that's also part of my setup, not the platform. Generally, I like my messages view on the far left because that's the one that I usually going to use the most, at least in this specific case. And I don't want to be looking for it, especially if I have a lot of tabs open. Now, so if I want to share this setup with somebody else, what I want to do is I want to do the save as. I can give the name something different name. I'm going to be lazy. I'm going to click on my original name, and then I'm going to select VS3-zip. So there's two options here. VS3-zip is essentially a zip file of the entire setup that I created. So that includes the VS3 and the databases that I use. Not database, databases. If I use encrypted, it gives you the option, it basically forces you to do password. But VS3-zip is the one that you would want to use if you want to share with other colleagues. That way they don't have to go recreate this. If you give them the VS3 and it has databases, when they try and go online, it's not going to decode anything because it doesn't have the databases. So VS3-zip is what you want to do to share your setup. So the way I used to do this when I used to do this when I used to create setups for other engineers, I would work with the VS3, and then once I was done and ready to share with them, I would convert it over to VS3, and that's what I would go give them. And then when I go back to updating the setup, I would go back to VS3. The reason I do that is that once you convert this over to a VS3-zip, you will not be able to change the platform. I cannot go back and change the name. It's meant to be static at that point, but it is meant to be mobile. So if I do this here, change this to VS3-zip, go ahead and save, and that gives me a file that I can share with everybody else. So if I close my vehicle spy, I'm going to open this folder first. We have the VS3 and VS3-zip, the VS3-zip. At this point, it doesn't matter which one I click, it will open up my setup. But if I'm going to share with somebody, again, I want to use the VS3-zip because this is self-containing. It contains everything that they will need to use your setup. So here we'll notice that the platform here is grayed out because I can't change it, but it opens up with the same tabs that I had before. I can go to the databases that I loaded in, and I'll be able to do this exact same thing, except on a different computer. Can someone else recreate this? Of course they could, but they're wasting time. Especially if you already did the work, why would they want to do this work again? Because they would have to make sure that they download the exact same file version as you did and put it in the exact same location. And that is kind of a waste of time. Now that we covered the basics, we're going to cover how to do data logging. And the reason I'm doing that is because it kind of builds off of what we just learned. So here, what I'm going to do now to configure the data logger is I'm going to go to measurement, VehicleScape DAC. Now in VehicleScape DAC, we'll usually get this window by default first because we already have the databases loaded in or the platform created. There's nothing really to do at this window at this moment. All I have to do is really go to channels. Now in channels, it's really a list of all the databases that are loaded in. So if I want to be very selective of the data that I capture, this is where I would want to do it from. So I could go into CAN channel here, and I can specifically select a couple of signals from here. I can go to the LIN channel as well. Let me minimize some of these things here so I can get there faster. LIN channel, where are you? Oh, here it is. And let's say I wanted to just collect these two specific signals from the LIN channel. Now, if I want to collect something from Ethernet, I can always search up here what I'm looking for. And now I'm going to have here a couple of different battery voltages. I can see that there's some in AutoSAR, there's some in AE01, AE02. So here I do have to go do a little research here, figure out where my battery voltage is. And I can see that it's in AE02. So I'm going to go back to VehicleScape DAC, and I can say it's in AE02, which is right here. And then I'm going to pick this one here. And that's the one I want. Maybe it's the other one too. Let's pick both of them. Let's click on this online tab, which usually causes Vehicle Spy to go online. And I can see that one of them is not actually working. And so here, the dark colors means it's working, and the ones that are not dark means it's not working. So here, I think it's my second one, the first one that I selected. So I'm going to go back to channels, and I'm going to remove this one. Okay, so here I can record just this data. So from this window, I can also record data. I can do this still PC login from this window. All I have to do is click log, and this will log just the data that's in front of me. It will not log messages unless I told it to. In this case, I'm being very selective of what I want to log. So if I click stop, I can go to data, and then I should be able to see a log of that, which is in a CSV format. So right here, I can see the signal that I'm capturing, and we can see the values that are being populated as they get updated. So so if we wanted to just capture a subset in standalone mode, this is how you would test it. From here, all I have to do now is stop vehicle spy, and then I would click on this tab that says standalone login. And from here, there's a couple things that I could do. I can create a collection. Collections are basically you can create more than one. And I can say the first collection is just my signals. And here, what I would do is I would click on the second box where it says log only the item selected in channel style. So this would only log this list here. I can also go back to the standalone login here and create a separate standalone capture. Click plus, and I can say all data, for example. And if I leave the first box selected, that means it's going to capture all data that vehicle spy can see. So what I mean by that is when you go online and you see here, and you are filtered, whatever you can see here, that is what's going to capture under this location. Or what I can do is I can go to this select networks, and I can go, I just want to capture CAN1. I don't want to capture anything else. That's all I want to capture. And I can simply click OK. So maybe here it's going to be all CAN data. I can do this also with LIN, and I can do the same exact thing with Ethernet. So here, if I wanted to do Ethernet, I can say maybe I want to capture LIN, where are you, LIN? AE1, AE2. Well, in this case, if I'm going to log all of them, there's really no need for me to do this, right? I can simply just get rid of this list, and then I can just capture everything. So I can say all data. So now I have two different captures here that are going to capture. If for some reason I want to disable one, I can click on the box that says this enabled, and this will turn it off. So I don't actually have to delete it, especially if I did a lot of work to make it work. I can simply just click enable. Here, when I click on a specific selection, I can start immediately. So we have these when we want to start. So as soon as basically the hardware sees data, it should start recording. Or I can use start when expression is true. I can click on the FX button, for example, and then I can go into a specific database or receive table. In this case, I'm going to go receive. And I can say I want to go to AE02, and I want to capture when battery voltage is only greater than 12.5 volts. So I could be very specific when I want to capture specific log. So there's an issue that only happens when vehicle's power mode goes to off, for example. We can use that as the condition to log. So we're not just logging everything. There are cases maybe where we do want to log everything, and we'll just use start immediately. In this case, I want to log everything. I don't want to use a condition, but this is how you would enter it. And then when do we want to stop? So basically, this is how big the files are going to be. So I can say I want to capture 5,000 messages, and I'll do that for both, just to keep them kind of small, because I wanted to capture hopefully more than one log. And then when do we start? We can say we want to restart the collection when it's finished. So whenever it meets all these conditions, when do we want to stop? So how we added a condition to start, we can also say the opposite condition could be used for stopping. So if I use system power mode equal to off to log, maybe when I say stop, maybe it's when it's not off. That could be potentially one, or maybe it just captures a specific length of time. So if I want to capture let's say, for example, I want to capture when system power mode goes off, I would want to use when start expression is true, select the signal that gives me the power mode, and then whatever value equals an off. And then I can say I want to capture for 30 seconds. So maybe something happens right after it changes power mode to off, maybe within a 10-second window, it happens. So instead of being 10 seconds, maybe you give it a little bit longer time, maybe 15 seconds, 20 seconds, and then it'll create a log file. And again, you can create them as often as you want, or if you want to create more than one, or you just want to create one, I can just simply click do not restart the collection when finished. So here I'm going to do finish after collecting 5,000. I'm going to select restart collection when it's finished. And I want my collection to be just start immediately. So here, I'm going to do two different ones. I'm going to do just signals, and I'm going to do all data. And then once I'm done setting this up, at the very bottom, we can say when we want the device to go to sleep. Uh, Generally, 2 minutes is fine. That means that whenever there's no data or there's nothing happening on those buses, the device will go sleep. So if you're going to have a run test overnight, you probably don't want the device to be turned on because it might drain your battery. So here's 2 minutes usually seems to be a really good number. And then once we're done with this, once we're done configuring and we're happy with what we want to see, at the very bottom of this, we're going to click this button that says generate. Now, when it's done generating, it's actually going to be creating a couple of function blocks that we don't need to manipulate manually. It's actually doing it for us. And then once it comes up, we should be able to push this actually to the hardware. So we can disconnect the computer and run from that. Oh, so right here saying vehicle skip DAC start expression is error. And that's because I said there's an expression when in fact there's no expression. So I have to go back and fix that. Okay, so now let's go and click the generate button again. Hopefully go faster this time. And here we'll see this window and we'll see the Gigastar SD card. So I'm going to click send. And what it'll do is it'll send this configuration straight to the hardware. And all I have to just do is simply close the window. And so if I take my Gigastar now, we see that it's running. All I have to do at this point is disconnect the USB cable, and this will log data. So all I have to do now is just let it run. In order to configure this, I do have to have the device powered up so I can actually load in this in. So I could potentially do this at my desk and then take the device to the vehicle and then connect it. In this case, I happen to be connected to the system. So it's just a matter of disconnecting the USB, and then it will start logging data. So at this point, it's just let it run for a little bit of time, and then we'll extract data. Okay, so hopefully I've let it run long enough, or run long enough. So now the next step is kind of critical how we do this. So what I want to do here with my device is I actually want to disconnect it from power. So if I'm in the vehicle, disconnect it from the OBD cable or whatever harness you have to power it up. So in this case, I'm just going to pull this plug. It disconnects the power. And I will take this now to my desk. And then I'm going to connect the USB connection. And then I will power up the device with whatever means I have, whether it's a barrel connector, so external power supply, or I can do this in the vehicle where I plug it back to the vehicle, and then I should be able to now extract that data. This will keep it from logging in. So now to extract data, there's a couple of ways we can do this. We can go from VehicleScape DAC, go back to the original tab, and then click Extract and Export, or Tools, Extract and Export. It'll do the same thing. So I'm going to click on that button now, and it's going to open up a whole new window to be able to extract the data. So here it's connecting to my hardware. I can expand this out, and I can see it collected one log for signals, and it created I logged 4 files for the entire bus. And that makes sense to me because we're capturing a lot more data, and signals we're capturing a very small subset of data. So here all I can do now is I can select all, and then all I have to do now is extract all files to put this on my computer. So here if I go into, because I'm going to capture a lot, it goes pretty fast. So here I'm going to click on script, and we'll see all the data that it extracted. So we can see the signals here, and we can see all the data. Now that I clicked export, it gets me to another tab, and it's really going from this tab to this tab now. And here what I want to do now is I want to specifically do the signals. And here we see all data, here's signals. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to close the other ones, or I'm going to deselect them. I'm going to select the partition, and I'm going to go say removed unused signals. This will get me down to the list of the data that I wanted to look at, nothing more. From here, what I can do is I can say I want to convert this to an MDF format, or I can do a CSV. MDF will allow you to use Data Spy within Vehicle Spy. So if you got the latest version of Vehicle Spy, Data Spy is included now. So you can do data analysis. or we can do a CSV format, and then we can do like Excel if we wanted to. And then all I have to do now is really click export, and this will convert these signals into these two formats. So here, if I go into script, we see that there'll be two new files. There's a CSV, and then should be this DAT. So these would be files that we should be able to load into our other tools. So here, because CSV opens up in Excel, I can double click and I can see the data in there. But keep in mind, I still have the raw data from the signals. So in signals, when we look at the raw data, it'll actually include the entire message for that one signal. And of course, all data will include everything. And so if I wanted to do the other ones, I can say maybe I want to take the last file, or maybe the last one of the files. Instead of creating all these individual files, maybe I want to convert this over to a different format, CSV, for example. And I would do the same thing. I would click export. This will open up. And then here's my all data. So I should be able to click on that. And this will give me all the raw data. So I can always replay this back to Vehicle Spy to decode it, because in this case, it's not decoding for me. But I can play this back to Vehicle Spy to decode it. Now, I'm not going to show you how to analyze this data. We do have a tool that's called Data Spy, and we do have a video online that if you just search for Data Spy within our YouTube library, they'll walk you through how to use Data Spy. The gentleman, John Mitchell, who did the video, does a lot of the use cases on how to analyze the data, especially for data where you have multiple trace files. It'll let you load in more than one file at a time, as opposed to one file at a time. So it can speed up your analysis quite a bit. So I do have additional videos you can go online to watch. Creating advanced graphical panels is one of them. It'll show you how to create graphical panels from real basic to advanced versions where you can create your own graphics, how you would do that using like PowerPoint, for example. If you happen to have Vehicle Spy, the Enterprise Edition or the Enterprise level, you can also use things like Gateway Builder to do CAN fault injection or LIN fault injection. And I have videos on how to do that as well. And then I also have a video on which I did for 10-base T1S webinar. 10-base T1S is a newer form of automotive Ethernet. The first 25 minutes are covering basically the introduction to automotive Ethernet. And of course, it doesn't cover everything. And most of the section is really covering the newer version, how that protocol works, because it is a little bit different than other protocols. Other than that, I thank you for watching.